Howdy y'all, my name is Nicholas McIntire. I am an epic fantasy writer and a YouTuber, and my debut novel, The Hunter's Gambit, is out now. Today I'm going to be sharing 5 tips for world building. If you are in the midst of planning an epic fantasy series, or really anything that doesn't take place in the exact world we live in, world building is going to be a necessary part of your creative process. Some people find this really difficult, others don't seem to have that much of a problem with it. But there are a couple of things that you will typically find in anybody's process for creating a believable and sustainable world. So because this video is meant to be reasonably short, and I could probably talk about this for hours if left unchecked, I'm going to break this up into a continuing series. This is the first part of that. It covers what are, to me, the more elemental aspects of how to approach world building, and a good litmus test to figure out if the way you're approaching your world is right for the story you're trying to tell. Before we get any farther, hit the like and subscribe button down below and ring the bell if you want to be notified every time I release a video. I typically release new videos on Mondays, but I'll probably also be throwing in some bonus videos, if you will, when things come up that really just get me excited or that don't fit into exactly what I've designed this channel for. And of course, all the views expressed in this video are entirely my own, and this is a super subjective sort of thing, as is most creative writing, so bear that in mind. The first thing I need to know before diving into world building 100% is where my characters fit into the world and into the story. My characters drive the stories that I create, and as a result, knowing where they fit into the world around them, their placement in it, and the power they have where they're beginning is crucial to developing things further. And what is determined by the world around them, like class, status, agency, money. All of these things will help you begin to fill in the world you're trying to create. Now, quick caveat, that's how I begin all of my plotting and writing processes. That does not mean that you have to do it this way. Some people create the world and do like a really in-depth deep dive, and their story and their characters come from the world that they create. That is a completely viable way to do this. It's just not one that I have a ton of experience with. But for the sake of this video, we're going to be talking about the things that I do when launching into creating the world that a series or even a standalone take place in. Number 2, what I call zoom, which means how close or how distantly are you viewing the world of the story you're trying to tell. If it's an epic tale that takes place over a ton of books, you're not going to be nearly as concerned with the minutia, the teeny tiny little details at the very beginning, because you're still trying to explain this vast, enormous world that all of these different people inhabit. If you're doing a short story or even a novel or novella that takes place entirely within one town or one small country within this much bigger world, then your focus is going to be a lot more zoomed in and micro in the things you analyze, the things you underline when you're explaining how this world is obviously different than the ones that we're in, but also things that help you convey to the reader that this is a viable, functioning world with eccentricities and teeny tiny details that help people be immersed in the world and thus in the story you're telling. One of the fastest ways to get people to put down your book and sort of run away is a inconsistent world where you're focusing on all the things that make it weird, but either you can't consistently bring that storyline through, or the things you focus on have nothing to do with the story or with your characters. It's just more of you saying, like, hey, look at this cool world I created, but it doesn't actually impact your story or your characters' lives in any way. I'm going to give you an example that I literally just made up. This is not from anything, and if anyone wants to take this idea and run with it, be my guest. But let's say you're talking about a world that's particularly arid or even xeric, where there's really very little water, or water is still somewhat scarce. And as a result, let's say the people of this country have to rethink where they find a source of food. And it just so happens that in this village or country or what have you, they have decided to start hunting and eating a type of semi-sentient mucus. And that's been the way things are for hundreds of years, and they're farmed, and there's a whole system for it. However, at one point towards the beginning, your main character realizes that all of these semi-sentient mucus-formed creatures have a language, and they are all speaking to each other. And your character decides to figure out if eating them is technically murder. Now, it was meant to be a ridiculous idea, but I could actually make that into something if I wanted to. That's an example of a very micro idea. It's very zoomed in on one particular practice in one particular culture and one character's thoughts and feelings about this one practice. The trick here is this could be a fantastic short story. It could be a thought piece. That could be a standalone story. But once again, that is taking you into a very, very zoomed in level of this culture or this society. If you wanted to make this story into a much broader, epic kind of tale, you could still use this idea, but it would be a much, much shorter, more abbreviated version at the very beginning of the story to maybe tell the audience something important about your main character. Maybe they're really passionate about the rights of others, and this was how they sort of discovered that passion. Maybe they can talk to other creatures mentally or magically, and as a result, this awakens that ability inside of them, and then they take that and they move it to a much larger scale later on in the story. If you stay focused on that one idea, like I said, you could make that into a short story very easily, but it's really hard from that one idea to then try to keep it going and turn it into something more gripping, unless you just abbreviate it, put it at the beginning. It's a quick 5-10 page lesson that the main character learns before moving on to other things. Tip number 3 is determining the kind of world you're trying to create. Now that might sound obvious, but keep in mind that a world can be really anything you want it to be. If you're writing a story about anthropomorphic toys, a world could be a child's playroom. If you want to take it darker, it could be an abandoned children's hospital. You can really make this as expansive or as tiny as you want to, depending on what fits the story, once again, that you are trying to tell. So when determining the kind of world you're building, some of the most important questions are, where do structures of power lie? If it's divided, how is it divided? Is it divided by different kinds of government or religions, geography, magic? There are all kinds of ways you can break people up and create either divisions, or you could do it all about one country and the natural divisions that occur within that one place due to magic, money, agency, race, all kinds of different ways to show both divisions and what brings people together. But for example, if you're using religion as a way of showing, oh, this country, everyone believes the same thing, do keep in mind that that's basically never true. No matter what population group you're looking at, homogeneity is pretty much out. No one group has believers who all believe the same thing with no dissenters. No political party or monarchy has a country full of people who are all 100% into whatever is happening. You're always going to have dissent, and it really depends on your story how big of a deal you make that dissent be. If this is going to be a rebellion story where they're overthrowing the evil empress and setting up a democracy, then dissent is really, really important. But just as easily, you could take a country where everyone's generally happy and the people who want it to go back to the way it used to be or whatever it is can be used instead for comic relief, or to provide a different way of looking at the system that everyone else thinks is wonderful, and you get to determine how big of a deal that actually is. Number 4, and this is extremely important, but number 4 is consistency. It sounds simple, and it shouldn't be super, super difficult as long as you don't make your world initially insanely complex. One of the reasons I would advise you not to start off with an insanely complex world, meaning you can create an insanely complex world. That is fine. But don't dump all of that onto your reader at the very beginning, because it's a whole lot to try to take in, and readers are either going to just skim past it or get frustrated and shut down. You don't want every tiny little detail to be super, super, super important to understanding the story as you begin. It's a much more effective tactic for both your and the reader's sanity to slowly but consistently take them deeper and deeper and deeper into your world as you move through the plot, and if you're writing a series, as you go through each book. You don't want to start off with this ridiculously high learning curve, because a lot of readers, especially today, don't have the attention span or the interest at the very beginning to go that deep with you yet. You sort of have to earn that by exposing them to characters that they love and storylines that they can really get behind and emotionally connect to. And then once they're invested, you can start to take them deeper. So you can make the world as complicated as you want, but be very judicious in how you release bits and pieces to your reader. I would say start with the things that are the most important to your story and to your characters, things that you have to understand in order for the story to make sense. And then once you've got those and people are pretty comfortable with that, you can start layering in deeper and deeper elements of your world to make it feel more fleshed out and colored in and more believable, and make it a place that your reader ultimately wants to go to, that they want to live in, and they get to do that in a small way through reading your stuff. All right, last one, number 5, is feasibility. One of the easiest ways to spot a feasibility issue or success is on maps. If you have a just vast and terrifying desert and it directly borders a lush green forest, unless there's a really strong reason for that, that's not going to work in reality, unless that desert was created by a curse or there's some specific reason. Weather patterns don't typically allow for that kind of stark change. Just like you typically don't have just straight up plains, flat, 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 hitting a mountain range with no foothills in between. Pay attention to the various things about how the real world works, and then try to echo that in the way you create your world. There are also feasibility elements that come up, like if you have a capital city, but there is literally no source of water anywhere near it. You haven't referenced that there's a lake or a river or even an ocean. There's nothing around it that would sustain the people who have to live there, and in a lot of medieval cases, take away their waste and all that sort of thing. Look at how London was built, and it has the Thames going straight through it. You need certain elements in whatever world you're creating that make it feel like, yes, people could actually live here. Water is a big one, and it's one of the most often missed elements. And it's not hard to get around. You could say that the entire capital city is right over an enormous aquifer, or that there's a deep, deep lake underneath, and that's where they draw all their water from. There are ways to fix this. But typically, look at how cities in the past were designed and where they were placed, because that's going to give you a pretty good idea of what elements make for a good place for a bunch of people to gather and live. As I said, I could go on for a really long time talking about this and discussing different ways to approach things and all of that. But if you're just getting started, especially, these are things I want you to think about. And if you've built a world and you're working on it and you're working through your story, see if the world you've created stands up to these things, and if not, why. It might not be a problem for you at all that it doesn't have some of these elements, but I would rather everybody know exactly what they're working with and potentially spot any things that they glossed over or forgot to mention than get 5 books into a series and then realize, oh, I never talked about how important that one thing was, and now I've got to either retcon the entire history of this place. All of this is way, way easier to fix if you catch it at the beginning than if you're trying to play catch up with your own inconsistencies and logic issues later on down the line when you've already established your world and what's going on within it. All right, thank you all so much for spending a little time with me today. If you enjoyed this, please, once again, like and subscribe down below, and leave a comment if you have any questions or there's something I didn't talk about that you would like to explore further. I would love to have a discussion about this in the comments below. And as I said, I'm going to try to make this a series so that we have a chance to go in deeper to various elements. If there's something you specifically want to see, let me know. My debut novel, The Hunter's Gambit, is available for Kindle on Amazon and in paperback wherever fine books are sold. You can find links to that down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.